Hello folks, we are talking about implications of population growth and Malthus's population theory. In this video you're going to explain the implications of population distribution and density and interpret and apply theories, which is Malthus's theory of population growth and decline. So you should take a moment and make sure that your notes are set up like the ones right here. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is the implications of rapid population growth. And so one of the terms that you need to know associated with this is carrying capacity. This means the same thing as overpopulation, but our specific definition here is the amount of people that can be supported by the available natural resources. And so this actually varies from region to region, right? So it depends on technological advancements, which would then increase productivity and the livability of the land. So does a country have what it takes to kind of modify the land to meet the needs of their population? More developed countries, or MDCs, have higher carrying capacities than LDCs, and it's because of that economic and technological availability. And so what we're going to do is we're going to break down implications of population growth using ESPN again. So I'm going to talk to you about economic, social or cultural, political, and then natural and environment implications. Okay, so first let's talk about economic implications of population growth. First of all, we see a strain on infrastructure, and you're going to come across that term a lot in AP Human Geo, and infrastructure is kind of just the basic things that you need for a society to run and be successful. So think about things like where do people live? Right? And then access to things like running water, sewer systems, if it snows, snow plowing, police departments, fire departments, hospitals, medical care, schools, daycares. These are all examples of infrastructure. Telephone networks, Wi-Fi. So all of this is infrastructure. And when you're overpopulated, obviously you're going to see a strain on that, right? There might be competition for where people are going to live. Or if a country rapidly develops, they may not have the infrastructure like running water and sewer systems or large police departments that can accommodate that rapidly growing population. Economically, we also see availability of jobs as an implication of population growth, right? If there aren't enough jobs for people to work, they're going to become impoverished. And lastly, it's important to think about population growth with a business mindset, because businesses are going to locate near large customer and worker bases. So that actually helps businesses kind of determine where they want to be located. Social and culturally, overcrowding is obviously a huge issue with population growth, and this could lead to things like bad living conditions and intense competition for jobs, right? So we don't want to see tension building between groups of people or individuals because of this overcrowding situation. Politically, we do see some implications. I'm just going to talk about them very briefly. What you need to know is redistricting. And this is when populations shift, the boundaries for our representatives shift as well. Right? So there is some sort of political and governmental implication in that we're seeing kind of changes in political demographics over time. And then lastly, naturally or environmentally, we see pollution, right? And so when you're talking about pollution, make sure you're very specific, because there is water pollution due to trash buildup, right? But there is also air pollution due to industrialization, right? And then we also see food supplies that could be a potential issue, right? So is there enough food to feed everyone? Are there enough agricultural surpluses or distribution systems that will accommodate for that large population? Okay, so We're going to talk about Thomas Malthus's theory on population growth now. And this guy was an English economist. He wrote a book called An Essay on the Principle of Population in 1798. And his main claim, right, the argument that he makes is that the world's population was growing exponentially or geometrically. And what that means is it's doubling, right? So think about like multiplication. So 2, 4, 8, 16 is what population looks like. However, he argued that this population was growing much more rapidly than the arithmetically reproducing food supply, right? So he said that food output grew arithmetically, so at a very slow rate, and think kind of like addition, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So ultimately, this is going to put a strain on the resources of our world, and beyond this point, where food intersects with population growth, there's going to be huge amounts of hunger and famine and competition for that food supply, but ultimately it's going to be a food shortage. However, there are a lot of criticisms of old Malthus. First of all, he assumed that food production was confined spatially. And what I mean by that is that people can only eat what's grown in the country in which they live. So he did not account for globalization, right? And so this image of people interacting all across the world helps me think of globalization, right? We can exchange our agricultural goods across the world, right? Some places import food, other places export foods, depending on their economic situation or their agricultural situation. And also, we have improved transportation like highways, freight trains, airplanes, and cargo ships that make it possible to distribute food across the world. So today, it's not an issue that we don't have enough food. It's about, is it being distributed correctly? He also argued, obviously, that food production was going to grow at a much slower rate than population, and he was also incorrect there because in 1798 we didn't have mechanized agriculture. And what I mean by that is the internal combustion engine, which helped us kind of speed up our agricultural output and need less laborers to harvest food, right? And so we have huge tractors today, right, because of these engines. We use better growing techniques than we did in the 1800s. And technology is really developing into pest-resistant seeds. We're using pesticides and herbicides and bioengineering to make sure that our food is growing rapidly. Also, he didn't know about food preservation systems either, right? So in 1798, there were no refrigerators. There was no tin canning, right? And so these are two examples of ways that we can preserve our food today and make it last a little bit longer than he thought it was going to be. Malthus also did not account for human control over reproduction. So contraception was not widespread, and it was not developed during Malthus's time, right? So he thought that our population would continue increasing as a result of human nature. However, we see changing roles of women, access to contraception, all really factoring and slowing down our population growth overall. However, there are these people called Neo-malthusians. These are people who believe that Malthus is still correct, and they have a few arguments as well. First of all, we do see recent explosions in population growth, right? Think about it. Our doubling time is decreasing. And so they like to look at that to kind of indicate that our population growth is still going unchecked. They also like to talk about sustainability. Okay, and what I mean by that is that environmental problems like resource depletion, so you can see that we're not just running out of food, according to Neo-malthusians. We're also depleting our forests. We're overfishing in our oceans. We are running out of oil and new types of energy. And there's also water shortages going on right now. So these are going to alter both agricultural production, but also just our ability to live in general. And then we also see Neo-Malthusians argue that overconsumption kind of proves Malthus's theory. And what I mean by that is, for instance, more developed countries consume 8 times more food and more resources than LDCs. This is the idea of overconsumption, that poverty and hunger are issues today in our world because the proportion of overconsumption of the rich people and the proportion of underconsumption of the poorest people in our world, right? So people are really straining to survive in some places, and that's because distribution of food and resources is unequal.